The Luna collar. That was my first thought when consciousness clawed its way back. Not where am I, not what happened, just the collar burns. Cold metal pressed into my throat like a noose. My wrist throbbed with heat that shouldn't exist, glowing silver white in the darkness, and my mouth tasted like copper and something bitter, something that made my thoughts move through mud. Drugged. I'd been drugged. Last thing I remembered, delivering moon root to the kitchen of Alpha King in the Citadel. Then hands in the dark. A voice saying she'll do. Then nothing. Now I was in a bed that wasn't mine, wearing a ceremonial gown I didn't choose, marked with Luna symbols I never agreed to. And Alpha King Kyle Blackthorn was standing in the doorway watching me realize what they'd done. Quiet, he said, unless you want the guards to hear you screaming. I wanted to scream anyway, because somewhere in this citadel a conspiracy was already moving, one that would drag me into a war between brothers, a throne built on lies, and a bond that should have been impossible. I didn't know any of that yet. I just knew the mark on my wrist was glowing, and the man in the doorway was either the biggest threat I'd ever faced, or the only reason I'd survive what was coming. Hey, before this story pulls you in, and trust me, it will, I just need to say something. You're here, and I don't take that for granted, not for a single second, because in a world full of noise, you chose to stop. You chose to listen. And that's rare. That's real. This is a space built for dreamers like us, people who feel things deeply, who get lost in stories, who believe words can change the way we see the world. And who am I in all of this? I am nothing but a pencil in the hand of the Creator, just a vessel passing these stories through to you. But dreamers like us, we connect, we build something together. We lead lives that matter, one story at a time. So settle in, get comfortable, because what happened in the end will really blow your mind. This one is going to stay with you long after it ends. If you enjoy stories like this, please subscribe and drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. I want to know you're there. All right, are you ready? Let's begin. The scent of pine wood, that was what pulled her in. That was Raven's first thought when consciousness clawed its way back. This wasn't her home. Raven tried to sit up and her body screamed in protest. Every muscle ached like she'd been thrown downstairs. Her dress, not her dress, too fine, too white, rustled against unfamiliar sheets, where her head spun. Silver herb, wolfsbane maybe. She never remembered taking it. She tried to remember, tried to piece together how she'd gotten here. The day replayed in fragments, blurry, wrong. Then the flashback. Earlier that day, Raven had gone to the Citadel. The Citadel loomed. Raven had seen it from a distance her whole life. Massive stone fortress perched on the mountain ridge like a sleeping dragon. But she'd never been inside. Never had reason to be. Her family supplied herbs to minor nobles and merchant houses. Occasionally a captain of the guard who knew quality medicine when he saw it. But the Alpha King's household? That was her mother's territory. A relationship built over years of reliable service and discreet silence. But she was too sick to come herself, so she sent Raven. Now Raven stood at the servants' entrance with a heavy basket of carefully wrapped herbs, digging into her shoulders, and uncertainty churning in her stomach. The guard at the gate barely glanced at her. Delivery? Moonroot and silverleaf for the kitchens, Raven said, keeping her voice steady and professional the way her mother had taught her. Healer Alara's order. The guard checked a ledger, nodded, and waved her through. That was easier than expected. Raven adjusted her grip on the basket and stepped through the gate into a world she'd only ever imagined. The Citadel was chaos. Servants rushed past carrying linens, flowers, casks of wine. Guards moved in tight formations, escorting visiting dignitaries. Nobles in fine clothes clustered in doorways, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. And everywhere, the air hummed with tension. Something was wrong. Raven could feel it the way she could feel a storm coming, the way animals knew to hide before lightning struck. She kept her head down and followed the directions she'd memorized, through the outer courtyard, past the training grounds, down the covered walkway toward the kitchen complex. Almost there. Then she heard it. Fled. She actually fled. With Prince Darius, they're saying. The ceremony's in 2 hours. What's the Alpha King supposed? Raven's steps slowed despite herself. Who fled? Luna Celine ran off with his own brother. Oh no. The mating ceremony. The one her mother had mentioned. The political alliance everyone in the territory had been whispering about for months. The bride had fled. Raven quickened her pace. Not your problem. Make the delivery. Collect payment. Go home. She reached the kitchen entrance and slipped inside, grateful for the relative quiet. The head cook, a stern woman named Marta who'd been purchasing from her mother for years, looked up from where she was frantically directing staff. "Healer Alara's delivery," Raven announced, setting the basket on the preparation table. Marta's eyes widened. "You're not Alara. My mother's ill. I'm making deliveries in her place." Raven began unpacking the carefully labeled bundles. Moonroot for calming teas, silverleaf for fever reduction, valerian for sleep aid. Everything she promised. But Marta wasn't looking at the herbs. She was staring at Raven's face. "Moon goddess preserve us," the older woman whispered. "You look just like—" Footsteps, heavy boots on stone. Raven turned just as 3 guards entered the kitchen. They froze when they saw her. One of them, a scarred man with rank insignia Raven didn't recognize, went very, very still. "That's her," he said quietly. Raven's pulse kicked. "I'm sorry?" Same height, same build, same hair color. The guard stepped closer, circling her like she was prey he was evaluating. It could work. What could work? Raven backed toward the table, heart beginning to hammer. "I'm just here to deliver herbs. I don't—" "The Luna fled," the guard said flatly. "The ceremony cannot be cancelled. The Alpha King needs a bride." Ice flooded Raven's veins. "No!" Raven screamed. The door opened, and she snapped back to the present, to the reality of cold metal around her throat and a man standing framed in torchlight. Tall, dark-haired, eyes like winter storms that cut through the darkness and found her struggling upright in his bed. Alpha King Kael Blackthorn. And Raven knew, with the certainty of someone waking from a nightmare into something worse, that the glowing mark on her wrist meant exactly what she feared. She'd been claimed, by a man she'd never met, in a ceremony she couldn't remember, and the collar around her throat said she belonged to him now. Raven's breath came in shallow gasps. She scrambled backward, slamming into the headboard, and her hand flew to the cold metal circling her neck. "What?" Her voice cracked. "What did you do to me?" Already screaming at this point, the Alpha King didn't move from the doorway, just watched her with those winter-gray eyes that held no warmth, no mercy. "Quiet," he said. "Unless you want the guards to hear you screaming and assume I'm breaking you in." The words hit like a slap. Raven's shock ignited into fury. She lurched from the bed despite her shaking legs and stumbled to the mirror. The reflection stole what little breath she had left. White ceremonial gown embroidered with silver wolves, hair braided with moonstones, face painted with Luna marks, and around her throat, heavy, ornate, inescapable, the Luna collar. "No," the word came out broken. "No, no, no." She clawed at the collar, at the mate mark glowing on her wrist, at the dress that wasn't hers. But nothing would come off, nothing would break, nothing would wake her from this nightmare. "Stop." Kyle's voice cut through her panic. "You'll hurt yourself. I'll do worse than that." She spun to face him, claws half extended. "I'll tear this place apart. I'll expose you. You'll get us both executed." He finally moved, crossing the room with predatory grace. "If you expose the deception, Pack Law demands our deaths. Mine for fraud, yours for being party to it." "I'm not party to anything. You kidnapped me. The realm doesn't know that." He stopped 3 feet away, careful not to come too close. "They saw you stand beside me. Saw the moon accept our bond. Saw you wear the collar willingly. That wasn't the real me. What did you do?" "They don't know that either." His jaw tightened, and if they did, it wouldn't matter. The ceremony is done. The bond is sealed. We're mated in the eyes of Pack Law and the moon herself. Raven's legs gave out. She hit the floor hard, white dress pooling around her like a shroud. "How?" The question came out barely above a whisper. "How did this happen?" Kael was quiet for a long moment. Then he crossed to a side table, poured water into a glass, and set it on the floor near her, close enough to reach, far enough to avoid touching. "You want the truth? I think I deserve it. You do." He moved to the window, staring out at mountains she couldn't see. "The last thing you remember, delivering Moonroot to the kitchens. What happened after that?" "My head guard," Kael's voice went flat. "He's been dealt with how? In a way that ensures he'll never touch anyone without consent again." He turned to face her. "Tonight was supposed to be my mating ceremony. The entire realm gathered to witness my bond with Luna Celine Frostborn. A political marriage, an alliance. I know who she is. Then you know she fled. Minutes before the ceremony. With my younger brother, so I heard yes. His hands clenched into fists. The ceremony couldn't be cancelled. Not with every alpha in the realm watching. Canceling would have made me look weak, jilted, broken. My enemies were already circling. They would have struck before dawn. So you used me. My guards made a choice I didn't authorize. His voice went hard. They noticed you looked like Celine. Same height, same hair. And they decided to fix the problem. By the time I knew what they'd planned, you were already drugged. Already being dressed for a ceremony you'd never agreed to. You could have stopped it. I had seconds to decide. He met her eyes. Cancel everything and watch my throne crumble. Or proceed and deal with the consequences after. I chose survival. I chose to bind myself to a stranger rather than hand my kingdom to wolves who would tear it apart. Raven pressed her hand over her mouth. She was going to be sick. This isn't an excuse, Kyle continued. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm telling you what happened so you understand the impossible position we're both in now. She laughed, sharp and bitter. You put me here. This is your impossible position, which I'm offering to share. He pulled a leather pouch from his pocket and set it on the bed. It landed with the heavy clink of gold. You have two choices. Fight this and die, or survive with me for 6 moons and walk away rich enough to disappear forever. 6 moons? Long enough for the bond to stabilize. Long enough for the realm to accept you as legitimate. He gestured to the gold. After that, I pay you. Handsomely. You take your family and disappear to whatever territory you choose. New names, new lives, protected. And you, I claim you died in an accident, tragic loss. I'll mourn publicly and marry politically later. The realm will forget. Raven stared at the gold. At him. At the choice that was no choice at all. I need time to think about this. Fine, take your time, I'll wait. The door closed behind Kyle. Raven waited until his footsteps faded before collapsing onto the bed. The leather pouch of gold sat on the side table. Heavy, accusing, 6 moons. She should refuse. She should run. She should expose this entire sick deception and let the consequences fall where they may. But her mother's face flashed through her mind, Alara Ashfall. 43 years old but looking 60, hands stained permanently green from grinding herbs, and that cough, that terrible wet, rattling cough that brought up blood. 3 nights ago her mother had doubled over the workbench, gasping, "Mama, you need a healer. We are healers, love. A real healer. Someone who can..." "With what coin?" Alara had laughed, bitter and broken. "We can barely keep the shop stocked. How am I supposed to pay for lungwort extract? For silver blood treatment?" Raven had been silent, because her mother was right. They were dying slowly, all of them, while she ground herbs and pretended there was anything she could do to stop it. Raven stared at the gold. "You take your family and disappear to whatever territory you choose. New names, new lives. Protected. Her mother wouldn't just get treatment, she'd get protection. Guards. Safety. Her sister Lissa wouldn't have to quit her apprenticeship to work full-time in the shop. They could live. All Raven had to do was lie, pretend, play a role for 6 months while the entire realm watched. Run. The thought came sharp and desperate. Just run, tonight, disappear into the forest. But pack law was brutal. If she ran, she'd be declared rogue, hunted. And when they caught her, when, not if, she'd be executed. Not just her, anyone who'd helped her. Her mother, her sister. The Alpha King had made it clear. If you expose the deception, pack law demands our deaths. She was already complicit. The moment she'd stood beside him, drugged, unconscious, she'd become part of the lie. And now the lie was the only thing keeping her alive. Raven crossed to the window. Beyond the walls, somewhere out there, her mother was sleeping, coughing in her dreams, dying slowly. What would Mama want me to do? The answer came immediately. Survive, protect Lissa. Don't throw your life away for pride. Her mother had taught her that, had spent 20 years bending and compromising and swallowing her dignity to keep her daughters fed. Survival wasn't pretty, but it was survival. 6 moons, 180 days. She could do this. She'd survived losing her father, survived years of poverty, survived tonight, waking in a stranger's bed with a collar around her throat. She could survive 6 more months, for her mother, for Lissa, for the family that needed her to be strong. Raven picked up the gold. This is the price. This is what my life costs. Not much, but enough. 2 days later, Raven requested a meeting. Kale granted it. She stood straight, shoulders back, chin lifted. About the request, my answer is yes. And I want everything in writing. Something flickered in Kyle's eyes. Done. I want my family protected now. Not later. Agreed. And I want my own rooms. Not here. The bond won't allow distance yet. But connecting rooms. With a lock. Fine. She picked up the gold, felt its weight. Hated herself for this. But her mother's face flashed through her mind again. Pale, tired, dying. 6 moons, Raven said, voice hard as stone. I'll play your perfect Luna. I'll smile for the court. I'll wear the collar. I'll stand beside you and let the realm believe whatever lie you need them to believe. She met his eyes, let him see the fury burning there. But after that, I never want to see your face again. Kael's expression remained carved from stone. Good. Love makes wolves weak. Then we understand each other, perfectly. He turned to leave, then paused. The entire realm will be watching, waiting for you to fail. Don't give them ammunition. Don't embarrass me. And don't fall for the lie we're selling. Trust me, Raven said coldly. That won't be a problem. The door closed behind him. Raven stood alone, gold clutched in her hands. She let herself feel it, all of it. The grief, the fury, the fear. Then she took a breath, straightened her spine, and walked back to her chambers to begin learning how to be someone she wasn't. For 6 moons. For her family. For survival. Because sometimes survival was all you had, and sometimes it had to be enough. Raven woke to sunlight streaming through windows she didn't recognize, and a pressure on her chest that had nothing to do with blankets. The bond. It pulsed beneath her skin, alive, aware, pulling her toward wherever Kyle was in this massive citadel. She could feel him. Not his thoughts, thankfully. Just his presence. Like a constant awareness that she was no longer alone in her own body. She hated it. A knock at the door made her sit up too fast. Her head spun. Enter, she called, voice rough from crying. 3 young women slipped inside, moving with practiced grace. Servants. Palace staff. They looked at her with a mix of curiosity and caution. The tallest one curtsied. My Lady Luna. We're here to prepare you for breakfast. Breakfast. With the court. The formal introduction. The girl's smile was warm but wary. The Alpha King has requested your presence. Right. Because she was Luna now. Property. A trophy. Fine. What do I need to do? The servants worked efficiently, stripping the nightgown and replacing it with a fitted blue dress that made her look less like a virgin sacrifice, and more like someone who belonged in this world of gold and stone. They braided fresh moonstones into her hair, applied cosmetics that hid the exhaustion and tear-stained face underneath. When they brought the collar, Raven's hands clenched. Always in public, my lady, the youngest servant said softly. It marks you as Luna. Raven let them fasten it and tried not to feel the noose tightening. The dining hall was a theater of judgment. Every eye tracked her entrance. Foreign alphas, court wolves, elders with expressions that said they knew something was wrong but couldn't quite place what. Raven lifted her chin and kept walking. Kale stood at the head table, dark and imposing in black formal wear. When he saw her, he held out his hand. The gesture looked intimate. Possessive. Raven wanted to ignore it. But dozens of eyes watched, judged, waited for her to slip. She took his hand, the bond sang approval, and she resisted the urge to flinch. As she sat, Kyle pulled the written contract from his jacket and set it on the table between them. A visible reminder. This was business. He reached for a quill at the same moment she did. Their fingers brushed. The bond flared, sharp, electric, immediate. Both jerked back. Sorry, she muttered. Don't be. His voice came out rougher than expected. The bond reacts to touch. You'll adjust, will you? Storm gray eyes met hers. I don't know. The honesty in those 3 words made her chest ache. An elder stepped forward, ancient, scarred, with eyes that had seen empires fall. Alpha King, your Luna is unexpected. Raven's spine straightened. Kale's hand found hers under the table. Not romantic, steadying. The moon chooses as she wills, Elder Mordain. Indeed, the old wolf's gaze slid to Raven like a blade. But the doubt remained. Raven could taste it in the air. The meal passed in careful lies. Questions about how they'd met, when he'd known. Why the secrecy? Kyle answered with a story they'd hastily crafted. Secret meetings, forbidden attraction, the moon's will superseding politics. Every word tasted like ash. But Raven smiled, laughed at appropriate moments. Let Kael's hand rest on her shoulder like she belonged there. By the time it ended, her jaw ached and her chest felt crushed. Kael stood and offered his arm. "Walk with me." It wasn't a request. They left together, perfect and united, until the corridor emptied and Raven yanked her arm free. "Don't touch me unless we're being watched." Noted. They walked in tense silence to a private garden. Stone walls, a fountain, no witnesses. Kael stopped but didn't sit. "You did well. I'm so thrilled to have your approval. They're suspicious. The elders especially. Then maybe your guards shouldn't have kidnapped a random healer. I thought we have been through this already." His jaw tightened. "It doesn't excuse what they did to you. But this is the reality we're living in now." "We?" Raven turned on him. "There is no we. There's you, the Alpha King who needs a fake Luna to maintain power. And there's me, the woman you're paying to pretend. That's not we. That's a transaction." "You're right." The admission seemed to cost him. "But for what it's worth, your family's already been moved to protected housing. Guards posted. Your mother thinks you've been offered a court position. They're safe." Her throat tightened. "They don't know? I thought you'd want to tell them yourself. When you're ready." Raven turned away before he could see the tears burning. "Thank you. Don't. This is the bare minimum of what I owe you." They stood in silence, two wolves bound by deception, both pretending the weight crushing them wasn't slowly breaking bones. 4 days into her new role, Raven discovered that being Luna meant drowning. Tutors for etiquette, advisors for politics, servants who followed everywhere. Every conversation analyzed, every gesture scrutinized. She was a doll, a puppet in expensive dresses. And the bond made it worse, constantly pulling her toward Kael, whispering that proximity would ease the ache. She ignored it. But on the 5th morning, screaming shattered her carefully maintained distance. Raven ran toward the sound, lifting her skirts, abandoning propriety. The healing wing. Blood scent thick in the air. A young wolf thrashed on a cot, 2 healers struggling to hold him down. His leg, torn open, bone visible through shredded muscle. Too much blood. What happened? "Rogue attack," a healer gasped. "Border patrol. The wound won't close. It's..." Cursed rune. Raven recognized the black veins spreading. She'd seen this before. "Step aside. My Lady Luna, you shouldn't..." "I'm a healer before I'm Luna." She stripped off her formal robe, rolling up sleeves. "Do you have moonbane extract?" The head healer, a stern woman named Mira, hesitated. "Yes, but that mixture is dangerous. He'll die if we don't try." Raven moved to the warrior's side. "What's your name?" "T. Torn," he gasped. "Torn. Strong name." She pressed hands over the wound, ignoring blood soaking her skin. "This is going to hurt, but you're going to survive. Understand?" He nodded weakly. Supplies arrived. Raven worked with hands that remembered her mother's teachings. Mix moonbane carefully. Add silver ash drop by drop, heat just enough to activate. When she poured it over the wound, Torn screamed. The curse fought back, black veins racing before moonbane drove them down. Raven held him, chanting healing words, refusing to let go. Finally, the wound began closing. Torn passed out. Raven slumped against the cot, covered in blood, shaking. Mira stared. "How did you know that would work?" "My mother was a combat healer." Raven's voice came out hoarse. "Is he going to make it?" "If he survives the night, yes." Mira's expression shifted. "Thank you, my lady." Raven stayed until Torn's breathing steadied, then stumbled out directly into Kael. He grabbed her arms. Eyes went wide at the blood. "Are you hurt?" "Not mine. What happened?" "Rogues. Cursed runes. One of your warriors almost died." She pulled free, exhausted. "He's alive." Kael's expression darkened. "Rogues don't have cursed weapons. Someone's arming them. Does it matter? He's breathing." She swayed. This time when he caught her, he didn't let go. "You need rest. I need to check on him in an hour. Raven, I'm fine." But her voice cracked. The adrenaline crash hit. Her hands shook. She'd just saved a life, and all she could think was how different this was from her quiet shop. How this world was blood and war and politics. And she was supposed to smile through it all. Kael's arms came around her. Not romantic, not possessive, just steady. She should have pushed away, maintained distance. But she was so tired, so scared. So she let him hold her for 30 seconds. Let the bond settle. let herself feel something other than alone, then stepped back. I'm fine now. No, you're not. Well, I have to be. She met his eyes. That's what you need, right? Something in his expression softened. I need you to survive the next 6 moons. However you manage that, then let me heal. It's the only thing that still feels real. Noted. She turned to leave, then paused. Torn will need specialized care. Silver poisoning has after effects. I'll need supply access and permission to override Mira if necessary. Done. Just like that? You saved his life. Storm gray eyes held something she couldn't name. That's worth more than protocol. Raven walked away, feeling his gaze burn into her back. That night, word spread through the Citadel. The new Luna had saved a dying warrior, worked with her own hands, stayed covered in blood until the job was done. Not a delicate flower, not a political pawn, real. When Raven checked on Torn before bed, half the guard waited outside the healing wing, watching, grateful. She'd earned something Kyle's gold couldn't buy. Loyalty. 4 weeks into playing Luna, Raven learned the castle had its own breathing rhythm. It inhaled before dawn, that fragile hour when shadows still clung to stone corridors, and the guards changed shifts with exhausted silence. The kitchen stirred first, followed by the stables, then the training grounds where warriors prepared for another day of border patrols and rogue hunts. But before all of that, before the Citadel woke and remembered she existed, there was a window of time that belonged only to her. Raven slipped from her chamber wrapped in a pale wool cloak, her basket tucked under one arm, and a small blade for cutting roots hidden in her pocket. The stone floors were ice-cold even through her boots, and her breath ghosted white in the pre-dawn chill. No one stopped her. The guards had learned her routine by now, the strange Luna who rose before sunrise to wander the frost-bitten gardens beyond the Citadel walls. They probably thought her mad, or desperately unhappy. Both were true enough. She passed through the eastern gate, nodding to the night watch, and stepped into the wild gardens that sprawled between the Citadel and the pine forests beyond. Here, cultivation gave way to wilderness. Medicinal herbs grew in tangled patches among the frost-silvered grass. Ancient oaks twisted their roots through stone. The air tasted clean and sharp, burning her lungs in a way that felt like freedom. This was the only time she felt like herself again. Not Luna, not a placeholder, not bound to a man who barely looked at her except during mandatory court appearances. Just Raven. She knelt beside a patch of moonroot, its pale leaves glowing faintly in the pre-dawn darkness. The plant pulsed with gentle warmth against her fingertips, a healing herb, rare and powerful. Good for calming fevered wolves, good for easing war-torn minds that couldn't find sleep after battle. The pack healers had been grateful when she'd first brought them a basket full of moonroot and silverleaf. Surprised, too. They hadn't expected the new Luna to know anything about medicine, hadn't expected her to care. But Raven had grown up in a healer's household. Her mother had taught her which roots drew poison from wounds, which flowers eased pain, which bark could be ground into paste for infected bites. It was one of the few skills she possessed that felt useful here, one small way to prove she wasn't completely worthless. She loosened the soil carefully, working her fingers around the moonroot's delicate root system. The plant came free with a soft pop, dirt clinging to pale tendrils that still glowed faintly with stored moonlight. Beautiful, she thought, placing it gently in her basket. The sky was beginning to lighten, deep indigo fading to silver at the horizon. Stars still burned overhead, but they were losing their sharpness. Soon the sun would crest the eastern mountains and the Citadel would wake fully. Soon she would have to return to being Luna, but not yet. Raven moved deeper into the gardens, following a narrow path she discovered her second week here. Lavender frost clung to the grass, crunching softly beneath her boots. Pine sap drifted down from the upper ridges, mixing with the herbal sweetness of wild thyme and the earthy musk of damp soil. She breathed it in deeply, letting it fill her lungs, letting it remind her that she was still alive despite everything, despite the bond she didn't ask for, despite the marriage that wasn't real, despite the loneliness that pressed against her ribs every time she returned to her empty chamber stop. She told herself firmly, kneeling beside a cluster of valerian root. You're not a child. You knew what this was. She had agreed to this. She had chosen survival over death. And survival meant learning to live with the hollow ache in her chest that came from being invisible to the one person the bond insisted should matter most. Her fingers worked mechanically, cutting valerian stems and tucking them into her basket. The repetitive motion soothed her. Something predictable, something she could control. The bond had been mercifully quiet lately. No pain, no heat, just a distant hum at the back of her awareness, like a door left slightly ajar in a room she tried not to think about. Raven had almost convinced herself she could live like this. Almost. Then something changed. The bond stirred. Not pain. Not the searing command she'd felt during the binding ceremony or the dull ache that came when Kyle was injured in training. This was different. Awareness. A slow, creeping warmth that began in her chest and spread outward like ink bleeding through parchment. Her pulse stuttered. Her wolf shifted restlessly beneath her skin, suddenly alert in a way it hadn't been in weeks. Raven's hands stilled on the valerian roots. What? She lifted her head slowly, heart beginning to pound for reasons she didn't understand. And then she saw him. Across the open field, near the stables where the morning mist still clung to the ground in silvery veils, a dark figure moved through the frost. Kyle Blackthorn. Raven's breath caught. He was returning from his morning run, something she'd heard whispered about but never witnessed. His shirt clung to his frame, damp with sweat despite the freezing air. His dark hair was loose, falling past his shoulders in a way that made him look less like the iron alpha she'd grown accustomed to, and more like something else, something dangerous and beautiful and terrifyingly real. One of the pack horses trotted beside him, obedient and calm, its breath steaming in the cold. Kyle moved with the quiet, controlled power of a predator who never needed to rush. Every step was deliberate. Every movement spoke of discipline worn into bone and muscle through years of relentless training. Raven froze. She hadn't meant to stare. But she did. She watched the way his shoulders rolled as he walked, broad and scarred beneath the thin fabric of his shirt. She watched the rise and fall of his chest as his breathing slowed from exertion to calm. She watched the way frost crunched beneath his boots, and the way the horse beside him seemed to trust him completely, pressing its nose against his arm in casual affection. The morning light was beginning to break over the eastern mountains now, painting everything in shades of gold and silver. It caught in Kyle's hair, softening the harsh lines of his face. And for the first time since the binding ceremony, Raven saw him as something other than the monster alpha who'd bought her from her family. She saw the exhaustion carved into his posture, not weakness, but weight. Responsibility. The burden of an entire pack, resting on shoulders that never seemed to bend but must surely ache. She saw the scars along his forearms, pale against tanned skin, each one a story of battles fought and survived. She saw the way he moved, not with cruelty or arrogance, but with the kind of quiet strength that came from knowing exactly how dangerous he was, and choosing restraint anyway. Her chest tightened. This isn't real, she told herself desperately, even as her wolf whined softly in disagreement. This is a contract, a transaction. He doesn't care about you. This bond is a lie. But the warmth in her chest didn't feel like a lie, and the way her pulse quickened when he brushed a hand through his damp hair didn't feel forced. It felt treacherous, dangerous, like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing the ground beneath her feet was crumbling. What if it wasn't pretending? The thought slipped through her defenses before she could stop it. What if he could see me as more than the girl dragged into his life by force? What if there was something real beneath this bond? Her breath caught, her heart hammered, and suddenly, Kyle stopped, his head turned sharply, straight toward her. Panic exploded through Raven's veins. No. She ducked behind the twisted trunk of an ancient oak, pressing her back against rough bark, heart slamming against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack them. Heat rushed to her face. Had he heard her thoughts? The bond. Could it carry emotions that clearly? Could he feel her watching him? Could he sense the dangerous, unwanted admiration that had bloomed in her chest like a flower she desperately wanted to uproot? She pressed her palm to her mouth, barely breathing, trying to calm the wild drumming of her pulse. Stupid. You were staring at him like some lovesick. The bond hummed louder. Raven's wolf stirred again, restless and confused. She squeezed her eyes shut, silently begging the universe to let her disappear, to let the ground open up and swallow her whole so she wouldn't have to face whatever came next. But the universe had never been kind to her. Footsteps crunched softly on frost. The bond pulsed, warm, insistent, aware. Raven. His voice was low, calm, dangerous in its quiet intensity. She wanted to stay hidden. She wanted to run. Instead, she forced herself to step out from behind the oak, chin lifted despite the burning embarrassment in her cheeks. Kyle had been finishing his morning run when the bond stirred. Not pain. not the dull pressure he'd learned to ignore over the past 4 weeks. This was different. A warmth bloomed in his chest, foreign and unexpected and entirely unwelcome. It spread like heat beneath his ribs, carrying with it an emotion he didn't recognize. Curiosity? Longing? Something softer than the iron discipline he kept locked around his thoughts. His wolf lifted its head, suddenly alert. Kyle steps slowed. What? He'd grown accustomed to the bond's physical sensations, the way it pulled when Raven was frightened, the way it throbbed when she was in pain, the way it hummed with distant awareness when she was somewhere in the Citadel. But this was something else entirely. This felt deliberate, like someone had reached through the bond and pressed a hand against his heart. His gaze swept the frost-covered gardens instinctively, following the pull. And then he saw her. Small figure kneeling in the grass, pale cloak wrapped around her shoulders, basket beside her as she worked with careful, precise movements. Raven, his Luna, his wife. The word still tasted strange. Kael had expected many things when he'd agreed to bind himself to Damon Ashford's daughter. He'd expected resistance, anger, fear. He'd expected a frightened girl who would shrink from him and count the days until she could escape. He hadn't expected this, hadn't expected to find her awake before dawn, gathering medicinal herbs with the kind of quiet diligence that spoke of genuine skill rather than performative duty. Hadn't expected to feel the bond react when she looked at him. Because she was looking at him. Kael could feel it, her attention like a physical weight across his skin. Her gaze tracking his movements as he walked, her emotions bleeding through the bond in ways he suspected she didn't realize. Warmth, confusion, something that felt dangerously close to admiration. His wolf rumbled softly, intrigued. Kael told it to shut up. This wasn't real. The bond was forcing proximity, forcing awareness, but it wasn't forcing feeling. Whatever Raven was experiencing right now was just the bond playing tricks on her nervous system. Just biology and magic tangling together until she couldn't tell the difference between genuine emotion and manufactured connection. It can't mean anything. But when she ducked behind the oak tree, fast and panicked, like she'd been caught doing something forbidden, Kael felt his lips twitch despite himself. Caught staring. How human. He shouldn't follow. He should let her hide behind that tree, let her gather her composure, let her return to the Citadel on her own and pretend this never happened. That would be the smart thing, the safe thing. Instead, Kael found his feet carrying him forward, following the pull of the bond and the faint scent of herbs, and something uniquely her, clean, warm, threaded with nervous energy. When he rounded the oak and found her pressed against the trunk, eyes wide and face flushed, something in his chest tightened. She looked young, vulnerable, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with duty or contracts or political necessity. Just a girl caught in the moment, trying desperately to pretend she hadn't been watching him like he mattered. Dangerous, his wolf whispered. Yes, very dangerous. The horse had wandered off toward the stables, leaving them alone in the mist-wrapped garden. Her voice came out too high. She cleared her throat and tried again. I was gathering herbs. For the healing wing. She lifted the basket like proof, as if he'd accused her of something. Kael's gaze moved slowly from her face to her hands to the basket filled with moonroot and valerian. Something unreadable passed through his dark eyes. Surprise, maybe, or assessment, or something else she couldn't name. The silence stretched. Raven's pulse refused to slow. Say something, she thought desperately. Anything. Finally, Kael nodded once. Good. That was all. Just good. She waited for more. For dismissal, for questions, for the cold indifference she'd grown used to. Instead, he gestured toward the path leading back to the Citadel. I'll walk you back. Her heart skipped, traitorous and fast. You don't have to. I know. He was already moving, leaving her no choice but to follow. They walked in silence. No words. Just the sound of boots on frozen ground, the distant call of morning birds beginning to wake, and the soft rustle of Raven's cloak as she moved. Their shoulders nearly brushed. Raven kept her gaze fixed firmly ahead, acutely aware of every inch of space between them. The basket felt suddenly heavy in her hands. Her heart refused to settle back into normal rhythm. The bond hummed softly, not commanding, not painful, just there. Present in a way it usually wasn't. She risked a glance sideways. Kael's profile was sharp in the growing light, strong jaw, straight nose, dark brows drawn together in thought. He walked with the easy confidence of someone who owned every inch of ground beneath his feet. But there was something else, too. Exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes, tension held in the set of his shoulders. He carries so much, Raven thought, and immediately wished she hadn't. She didn't want to humanize him, didn't want to think about the weight of an entire pack resting on one man's shoulders, didn't want to wonder if he ever felt lonely in that massive alpha's chamber, or if he woke in the night with battle memories clawing at his throat, or if anyone ever asked him how he was. Stop, she told herself fiercely. He doesn't need your sympathy, he doesn't want it. But the thought lingered anyway, stubborn and unwelcome. They reached the eastern gate. The guard nodded to them both, carefully neutral. Kyle stopped just inside the citadel walls, turning to face her properly for the first time since they'd left the gardens. Raven's breath caught. Up close, in the golden morning light, she could see details she'd missed before. The faint scar along his jaw, the slight shadows beneath his eyes. The way his gaze moved over her face, not dismissive, not cold, but searching. Like he was trying to figure something out. The herbs, Kyle said finally, his voice rougher than usual. The healers mentioned you've been bringing them supplies. Raven blinked. Yes, I thought I wanted to be useful. You are, 2 words, simple, direct. But they hit her chest like a physical blow. You are. Not you could be or you should try or any of the 1,000 dismissive phrases she'd grown used to, just acknowledgement. Her throat tightened. Thank you, she managed. Kyle's jaw worked like he wanted to say something else. His hand twitched at his side, an aborted movement, quickly controlled. Then he stepped back, the moment breaking like glass. Rest, he said. Council meets at noon. And he was gone, disappearing into the citadel's shadowed corridors before Raven could form a response. She stood there for a long moment, basket clutched to her chest, heart doing strange, unsteady things behind her ribs. Something had shifted. She didn't know what. Didn't know if it was real or just another trick of the bond. But as she climbed the stairs to her chamber, she felt warmth lingering in her chest that had nothing to do with magic, and everything to do with the way Kyle had looked at her like she was something more than just a contract. Like maybe, just maybe, she mattered. Later that day, Kyle summoned her to the map room. Raven entered expecting council members. Instead, she found him alone. Maps covered the long oak table, weighted down by daggers and stones. Candlelight flickered across his face, catching the faint shadows beneath his eyes. He looked tired, not weak, just burdened. Show me, she said softly, stepping closer. He gestured to the marked regions. Here, here, and here. Rogue packs. All within a single week. Too coordinated to be coincidence. Raven studied the inked roots, her brows drawing together. Silence stretched, then she spoke carefully. Someone is feeding them our patrol paths. Yes. A traitor, she said quietly. His jaw tightened. Inside my court. She hesitated, then inhaled slowly. Then don't hunt the traitor, she said. Let the traitor expose himself. Kyle turned toward her sharply. Explain. Raven stepped closer to the table, pointing at 3 unmarked valleys. Call the elders one by one. Separately. Ask each of them for advice about redeploying border forces. Give each elder a different false patrol location. Kyle's eyes narrowed, not in anger, in focus. When the rogues attack, she continued, the location that gets hit will tell you exactly whose mouth carried the lie. The room went quiet. Kyle stared at her. Not as Alpha. As a man recalculating everything he thought he knew. That's... He paused. That's court warfare. Subtle. Ruthless. She shrugged faintly. Commoners survive by watching patterns. We don't have armies, we have instincts. His gaze lingered on her longer than necessary. You should have been born into court, he said slowly. Not dragged here by force. Something warm fluttered unexpectedly in her chest. She smiled before she could stop herself. That was when it happened. As they leaned closer over the map, their hands brushed. Barely. But the bond reacted instantly. Heat flared up her arm. Her breath stuttered. She smelled him again. Pine, smoke, power, and her wolf shifted restlessly beneath her skin. Kyle stiffened. His fingers curled slightly, resisting the urge to reach for her. They were suddenly too close, too aware. She turned to speak, and found his face inches from hers. His gaze dropped to her mouth. Her heart forgot its rhythm. Kyle stepped back abruptly, clearing his throat. I should let you rest. Yes, Raven said too quickly. Rest. She fled the room before the bond could convince her to stay. Later that night, alone in her chamber, Raven pressed trembling fingers to her pulse. The truth came quietly, dangerously. The bond wasn't the only thing pulling her toward him anymore, and that realization frightened her more than any enemy ever could. On the third moon turn, Raven made her first real mistake. An elite warrior was brought to the healing wing. Blue lips, shallow breathing, muscle spasms. Poisoned during a diplomatic feast. Raven pushed through the crowd. What happened? We think nightshade, Mira said. Raven checked his pupils. The spasms. Textbook nightshade. I've treated this before. Mira hesitated. My lady, perhaps we should run tests. There's no time. Raven was already moving. Every second counts. I need concentrated moonbane. But that's an order. The healers obeyed. Raven prepared the antidote with steady hands. She'd done this 100 times. Nightshade was deadly, but treatable if you moved fast. She administered it and waited. His breathing got worse. The warrior convulsed. His back arched. Blood seeped from his nose. No. Horror flooded her. No, this isn't. Mira pushed her aside, leaning close to sniff the warrior's breath. Her face went pale. It's not nightshade. The older woman grabbed different supplies with shaking hands. It's wolfsbane. Ice flooded Raven's veins. That's impossible. The symptoms are similar. And moonbane accelerates wolfsbane poisoning. Mira was already working frantically. You just made him worse. The words hit like a blade. Raven stood frozen as the healing wing erupted into controlled chaos. They worked for 20 agonizing minutes. The warrior survived. Barely. But as Raven left, blood drained from her face, she heard the whispers. The Luna doesn't know what she's doing. She's in over her head. Someone's going to die because of her. Kyle found her an hour later. She sat on the floor of her chambers, back against the bed, still wearing the blood-stained dress. Hadn't answered his knock. Hadn't responded to his calls. He'd used a key she didn't know he had. Raven. His voice was gentler than she'd ever heard. What happened? I nearly killed someone. The words came out flat. Dead. I was so confident, so sure, and I almost... She couldn't finish. Kyle sat beside her on the floor. Not touching. Just present. Tell me. So she did. Her overconfidence, her mistake. The warrior's convulsions, the shame. When she finished, Kyle was quiet. What did you learn? He asked finally. That I'm not skilled enough to be doing this. That I shouldn't. No. What did you learn about healing? She stopped. Forced herself past the shame. That nightshade and wolfsbane present similarly. That I should always confirm before treating. That confidence without verification kills. Good. His eyes held hers. Now you know something you didn't know this morning. That warrior's alive because Mira caught your mistake. Next time, you'll catch it yourself. What if the council uses this to... Let them. You're learning. He reached out, thumb brushing her wrist over the mate mark. The pack doesn't need a Luna who never fails. They need one who learns from failure. Even when it nearly costs a life? Especially then. She wanted to believe him. But the whispers echoed. Kyle stood and held out his hand. Come on, let's go have dinner you have tried for the day. The next morning, the trap snapped. Raven knew it the moment the alarm horns tore through the morning air. Sharp, urgent, the kind of sound that made her stomach drop and her wolf surge forward beneath her skin. She was in the healing wing, grinding dried moonroot into powder, when the first howl cut through the citadel walls. Her hands froze over the mortar. The pestle clattered against stone. The surge of unease that felt dangerously close to triumph. It worked. Before we go any further, if this story has pulled you in, if you feel the tension, the danger, the connection forming between them, stay with me. Because from this point on, nothing unfolds the way it should. The false information Kyle had planted, the patrol route he'd whispered to only one council member, the bait he'd dangled so carefully, it had been taken. Swallowed whole by whoever was feeding intelligence to the rogues. And now the trap had teeth. Guards rushed past the corridor windows, armor clanging, voices shouting orders. Wolves shifted in the courtyard below, their massive forms blurring between human and beast, as the pack mobilized with practiced efficiency. Raven's pulse hammered. She'd suggested this. She told Kyle to use false intelligence, to narrow down the suspects, to force the traitor's hand. And he'd listened. Moon goddess, please let it have worked. Minutes later, a sharp knock on the healing wing door made her jump. "Luna," a guard's voice, tense and formal. "The Alpha summons you to the High Hall." Immediately, her stomach flipped. She wiped her hands on her apron, heart racing, and followed. The corridors were chaos. Warriors moved with grim purpose, checking weapons, tightening armor straps, their faces carved from stone and determination. No one spoke to her. A few nodded as she passed, curt, respectful acknowledgments she still wasn't used to. 4 weeks ago, they'd looked through her like she was furniture. Now they stepped aside, made room, recognized her presence even if they didn't understand it yet. Raven's wolf rumbled softly with satisfaction. "Don't," she told it firmly. "This isn't about status. People might have died today." But her wolf didn't care about guilt. It cared about pack, and whether Raven wanted to admit it or not, this was her pack now. The high hall doors stood wide open. Raven's steps slowed as she approached, dread and anticipation twisting together in her chest. Inside, the council chamber buzzed with barely restrained chaos. Elders stood in a tight half-circle around the central platform, faces tense, eyes sharp with suspicion and fear. Whispers curled through the air like smoke, accusations, denials, the kind of political venom that came out when blood was in the water. At the center stood Kyle Blackthorn, still, radiating lethal authority. And before him, collapsed on his knees with trembling hands pressed to the stone floor, was Elder Merowyn. Raven's breath caught. Merowyn, the gray-haired elder who always sat 3 seats from the head of the council table. The one with the broad shoulders and steady voice who'd served the pack for decades. The one who'd looked at Raven during her first council meeting with something almost like sympathy. He was the traitor? Her stomach twisted. Kale's voice cut through the chamber like a blade through silk. The rogue pack attacked the eastern ravine at dawn. Gasps rippled through the assembled elders. Raven felt the surge of emotion. The eastern ravine. That was the false location. The trap. The information Kyle had whispered to only one council member during a private strategy session 2 days ago, and the rogues had swallowed it whole. Kyle's gaze lowered slowly to the kneeling elder, and Raven watched something dark and dangerous flash behind those ice-blue eyes. Not rage, something colder. More controlled. "The same ravine," Kyle continued, each word deliberate and sharp, "that you advised me to reinforce. The same location you insisted was vulnerable. The exact position you recommended we move our eastern patrols to defend." Silence fell like a guillotine. Heavy. Elder Merowyn's lips parted. Closed. Opened again like a fish gasping for air. I was only trying to protect the pack," he stammered, voice cracking. "I thought, the eastern ravine is vulnerable, Alpha, I swear I believed." "Enough." The single word cracked like a whip. Merowyn flinched. Kyle stepped closer, each footstep echoing through the hall like a countdown to execution. "You fed our patrol routes to enemies," Kyle said quietly, and somehow the softness of his voice made it worse. Made it more terrifying. "You sent wolves to their deaths. You betrayed the pack you swore oaths to protect." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Raven stood frozen at the edge of the hall, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The bond hummed with Kyle's emotions. Fury, yes, but also something deeper. Something that felt like betrayal wrapped in bitter disappointment. He trusted this man, she realized. And Merowyn sold that trust for what? The elder broke. His composure shattered like glass against stone. He collapsed forward, palms slamming against the floor, forehead nearly touching Kyle's boots. "He promised me protection," Merowyn cried, voice raw with desperation. "He said when he ruled, my bloodline would be elevated. My sons would have positions of power, my daughters would marry into high families, he promised." "Who?" Kyle's voice was no longer soft. It was iron. Command wrapped in lethal intent. Merowyn swallowed hard, his throat working visibly, sweat beading on his temples despite the cold. "Darius Blackthorn." The room erupted. Shocked murmurs crashed against the stone walls. Growls rippled through the assembled elders. Anger rolled through the chamber like wildfire catching dry kindling. Raven felt the bond flare, hot, furious, protective in a way that made her wolf surge forward and her own hands clench into fists. Darius, Kale's brother. The one who'd fled the Citadel with Selene Frostborn wrapped around his promises like a fool's crown. The one building a rogue army in the wildlands. The one who wanted his brother's throne badly enough to send assassins and traitors and poison-laced lies. Kale went completely, utterly still. When he spoke again, his voice was no longer cold. It was lethal, quiet and controlled, and absolutely terrifying in its restraint. "So my brother hides behind cowards," Kyle said softly, almost conversationally, like he was discussing the weather instead of treason and bloodshed. "Good. Now I know where to aim." He turned to the guards flanking the doorway. "Strip him of rank, remove his sigils, take him to the northern gate." Merowyn sobbed, an ugly broken sound that made Raven's chest ache despite everything. "Please," the elder's voice cracked. "Please, Alpha, I served this pack for decades. I raised my children here, Kyle didn't even look at him. "You betrayed it." Final and absolute. The guards moved forward, hauling the sobbing elder to his feet with no gentleness whatsoever. Merowyn's legs buckled. They dragged him anyway, his boots scraping against stone, his pleas echoing through the hall until the heavy doors slammed shut behind him. Silence fell again. This time it carried weight. Expectation. Kyle raised his voice, letting it echo through the hall with alpha command that made every wolf in the room go rigid with instinctive submission. By alpha law, Elder Merowyn is banished from Skyfang territory. His name is stricken from pack records. His bloodline forfeits all titles and privileges. If he crosses our borders again, Kyle's eyes swept the room, holding each council member's gaze. He will be executed on sight. No trial, no mercy, no exceptions. No one argued. No one dared. Then Kyle's expression shifted, hardened further, if that was even possible. "And send word to every border pack within 3 days' travel," he continued, voice dropping to something dark and dangerous. "Darius Blackthorn is declared rogue. Any wolf who shelters him, feeds him, or aids him in any capacity becomes an enemy to Skyfang. Any pack that grants him sanctuary will face our full retaliation." A ripple of tension passed through the room. This wasn't just banishment. This was a declaration of war. Kyle's gaze swept the assembled elders one final time, and Raven saw several of them shift uncomfortably under that ice-blue stare. "If anyone sees Darius near our territory," Kyle said slowly, deliberately, letting each word land with precision, "they are authorized to hunt him, injure him, capture him, kill him if necessary." The message was crystal clear. The Alpha had just painted a target on his own brother's back, and every pack within howling distance would know it by sunrise. Raven stood quietly at the edge of the hall, her heart pounding against her ribs, hands trembling slightly where she'd hidden them in the folds of her dress. This isn't the man I first feared, she realized with sudden, overwhelming clarity. This, someone worth following, worth trusting, worth... Don't, her mind warned sharply. Don't finish that thought. But her wolf was already purring softly, satisfied in a way that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with want. When the council finally dispersed, elders filing out in tense silence, guards returning to their posts, Kale turned toward her. Their eyes met across the emptying hall. Something unspoken passed between them, something deeper that neither of them was ready to name yet. Kale crossed the distance between them slowly, and Raven's pulse kicked up despite herself. He stopped just within arm's reach, close enough that she could smell him and something darker beneath, close enough that the bond hummed softly between them, warm and steady. "You were right," he said quietly, voice rough from shouting orders. "Your plan worked." Raven swallowed hard, throat suddenly tight. "People died because of this war," she whispered. "I only helped reveal the traitor." I'm not... "You revealed my enemy," Kyle interrupted, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "There's a difference." Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but charged, electric. His gaze softened, just slightly, just enough to make her chest ache. For a moment, the bond hummed gently between them, not demanding, just steady. "Before we go any further, if this story has pulled you in, if you feel the tension, the danger, the connection forming between them, stay with me, because from this point on, nothing unfolds the way it should." The message reached the wildlands before nightfall. Alpha Kyle's declaration tore through the scattered packs like wildfire through dry brush, fast, uncontrolled, impossible to stop. Messengers carried it on horseback. Runners shifted and howled it across territorial boundaries. Traders whispered it in taverns and supply camps. Within hours, every pack within 3 days' travel knew 3 things. Elder Merowyn was banished. Darius Blackthorn was declared rogue. And Skyfang's Alpha had just authorized a hunt. By dawn, Darius Blackthorn was no longer a prince in exile. He was prey. and the forest had teeth. His camp changed overnight. Darius felt it first in the silence, the easy camaraderie that had existed among his followers, the laughter around evening fires, the confident planning sessions, the sense of inevitable victory, evaporated like morning mist under the sun. Wolves who once bowed their heads now avoided his eyes. Guards deserted their posts, slipping away in the night with mumbled excuses about sick relatives or forgotten obligations. Traders stopped arriving with supplies. The steady trickle of food, weapons, medicine, it dried up like a stream bed in drought. Messengers he sent to neighboring packs never returned. Within 2 weeks, his army of 200 had thinned to barely 70. Not by war, by fear. Because Kyle Blackthorn had done something Darius hadn't anticipated. He'd made helping Darius more dangerous than opposing him. And wolves, at their core, were survivors. They knew which way the wind was blowing. The hunting grounds shrank as surrounding packs refused passage through their territories. Patrol parties shadowed Darius's camp constantly, not attacking, just watching, waiting, making it clear that one wrong move would bring swift retaliation. Every howl in the distance sounded like a warning. Every rustle in the underbrush felt like an ambush. The forest itself seemed to turn hostile. Darius stood at the edge of camp one evening, staring into the darkness beyond the firelight, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Genuine fear. Not of his brother, not directly, but of what Kyle had turned him into. Rogue. The word tasted like ash. Behind him, his remaining followers moved with nervous energy. Their voices had lost the easy confidence they'd carried when they first followed him into exile. Now they whispered, argued, questioned, and looked at him with eyes that said they were already planning their escape. "My lord." Darius turned. One of his lieutenants, a scarred wolf named Brennan, approached with carefully neutral expression. "The southern hunting party returned empty-handed again," Brennan reported. "The Silver Ridge Pack denied them passage through their territory, said any wolf affiliated with you is banned from their lands." Darius's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. "That's the third pack this week." "Yes, my lord." "And supplies?" Brennan hesitated. "We have enough food for maybe 2 weeks if we ration carefully. Less if we don't start hunting successfully soon." 2 weeks. Darius had gambled everything on this rebellion. His title, his position, his future. He'd promised his followers power, land, status when he took his brother's throne. Instead, he was leading them into slow starvation in the middle of hostile territory. "What about reinforcements?" Darius demanded. "The contacts I cultivated before we left, the packs who swore they'd support my claim." "Silent, my lord. All of them. Of course they were. Because Kyle had made sure the price of supporting Darius was higher than anyone was willing to pay." "Damn him." Darius turned away before Brennan could see the rage and desperation warring in his expression. Dismissed, the lieutenant left quickly, clearly relieved to escape. Darius stood alone in the gathering darkness, hands clenched into fists, breathing hard through his nose. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to be the hero of this story. The wronged brother fighting for justice. The true heir rallying loyal wolves to his cause. Instead, he was a fugitive being hunted by the pack he'd been born to rule. All because of her. His thoughts turned, as they always did lately, to Raven Ashford, the unwanted bride who should have been nothing more than a political inconvenience. Somehow she'd wormed her way into his brother's confidence. Somehow she'd become more than just a placeholder Luna. Somehow she'd helped devise the trap that exposed Merowyn and turned the tide of this invisible war. Darius had underestimated her. That was becoming increasingly clear. He'd thought Kyle's new wife would be weak, frightened, easily manipulated. Instead, she was proving to be exactly the kind of partner his brother needed. The kind of Luna who made an alpha stronger. I should have killed her when I had the chance. But dwelling on missed opportunities wouldn't save him now. He needed a new plan. A way to turn this around before his remaining followers abandoned him completely. A way to strike back at Kyle that would... "Darius?" Celine's voice cut through his thoughts. He turned to find her approaching from the direction of the supply tents, and felt his lip curl with automatic disdain. Moon goddess, she looked terrible. Celine Frostborn, once the most beautiful woman in Skyfang territory, once his brother's promised bride, stood before him looking hollow-eyed and thin. Her hair hung limp around her shoulders. Her dress was stained and ill-fitting. She'd aged 10 years in 2 months. "What?" Darius snapped. Celine flinched at his tone but pushed forward anyway. "We need to talk about supplies," she said quietly. The healers are running low on bandages and herbs. The women are asking when we'll... Do you think I don't know that? Darius's voice cracked like a whip. Celine stepped back instinctively. I just thought you used to listen when I... Used to... Darius laughed, bitter and sharp. That was before you became useless. The words hung in the cold air between them. Celine's face went white, then red. I left everything for you, she whispered, voice shaking. I abandoned my position, my family, my future. I chose you, Darius, when everyone said I was making a mistake. And what exactly have you given me in return? Darius demanded, stepping closer until she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Where's the strategic brilliance you promised? Where's the inside knowledge of Kyle's weaknesses? You were supposed to be my advantage, Celine. Instead, you're just another mouth to feed. Her breath caught. Tears welled in her eyes. And Darius felt nothing. Once those tears would have moved him, would have made him gentle his voice and pull her close and whisper promises against her hair. Now they just irritated him, made him feel trapped, reminded him of everything he'd lost because he'd been stupid enough to think with his cock instead of his head. Get out of my sight, he said coldly. Darius. I said get out. His hand moved before conscious thought. The slap cracked through the camp like breaking wood. Celine's head snapped sideways. She stumbled, catching herself against a tent post, hand flying to her cheek where red was already blooming against pale skin. The camp froze. Conversations died mid-sentence. Wolves turned to stare. Even the crackling fire seemed to quiet. Darius stood breathing hard, rage and shame and desperation twisting together in his chest. Celine looked at him with wide, shocked eyes, like she was seeing him clearly for the first time, like she was finally understanding what she'd actually chosen. Don't question me, Darius growled, voice low and dangerous. Not now. Not ever. You gave up the right to opinions when you became useless. Then he turned and walked away before he did something worse. Left her standing there with his handprint burning on her face and the entire camp watching. That night, Darius locked Celine in a storage chamber, not because she'd done anything particularly wrong, but because he needed someone to punish, and she was convenient. She stayed there for 2 days. No food, barely any water. Just what one of the camp women snuck to her when Darius wasn't looking. Cold stone walls, darkness, the smell of rotting supplies, and her own fear. When he finally released her, Celine emerged shaking and hollow-eyed. She didn't speak. Didn't meet anyone's gaze. Just returned to her tent and curled into a tight ball on her bedroll. And things only got worse from there. Darius drank heavily now. Started before noon. Didn't stop until he passed out near the fire. The alcohol made him mean. Made him reckless. Made him do things he'd regret in the harsh light of morning, if he bothered regretting them at all. He brought other women into camp. Didn't hide it. Didn't pretend. Flaunted them openly in front of Celine like she was nothing more than furniture he'd grown tired of. Sometimes he didn't even bother taking them to his tent. Just pressed them against trees at the edge of camp. Kissed them where everyone could see. Let his hands roam freely while Celine stood 10 feet away, frozen and humiliated. She learned not to react. Learned to swallow the tears until she was alone. Learned that crying only made him crueler. One night she stood beside the fire watching him laugh with another woman, some trader's daughter with easy smiles and wandering fingers. Darius had his arm around the girl's waist, his mouth on her neck, his attention completely, utterly elsewhere. And Celine finally understood. He'd never chosen her. Not really. She'd been a weapon against Kyle, a way to hurt his brother by stealing the bride he'd been promised, a symbol of rebellion wrapped in pretty words and prettier lies. But she'd never been wanted, not for herself, just as a trophy to parade in front of the brother he hated. And now that the rebellion was failing, now that Darius's grand plans were crumbling around him, she was worse than useless. She was a reminder of his failures. Celine sat alone that night, staring into dying embers, and let herself think the thoughts she'd been avoiding for weeks. I made a mistake. Not just a small one, a catastrophic, life-destroying, irreversible mistake. She'd had everything. A position as Cale Blackthorn's bride. Respect, safety, a future as Luna of one of the most powerful packs in the region. And she'd thrown it away for this. For a man who hit her when he was angry and claimed other women when he was bored. For a rebellion that was failing. For a future that looked increasingly like slow death in the wilderness. Her thoughts turned, unwillingly, toward Skyfang's citadel. Toward Kyle. toward the life she'd abandoned. Would he take me back? The question rose unbidden, desperate, pathetic. She'd betrayed him, humiliated him, run off with his brother on what should have been their wedding night. But Kyle was honorable, dutiful. Maybe, just maybe, if she returned broken and apologetic, if she begged forgiveness, if she swore she'd been manipulated and deceived, maybe he'd show mercy. Maybe he'd let her reclaim some small piece of the life she'd destroyed. It was a foolish hope, a desperate fantasy, but it was the only hope she had left. Tears slid silently down Celine's cheeks as she sat alone in the darkness. Behind her, Darius drank himself into rage with the trader's daughter in his lap. Ahead of her, a throne she no longer deserved waited in silence, and Celine Frostborn finally realized the truth. She had gambled everything on the wrong brother. On the other side of the pack, Raven and Kyle is getting stronger, awareness instead of compulsion. And Kyle had started appearing in places he had no business being. The healing wing at odd hours, the gardens where she took her evening walks, the library where she researched obscure poisons. Always with an excuse, always keeping careful distance. But always there. One night she found him on the battlements at midnight. He stood alone, staring at mountains bathed in moonlight. Something about his posture stopped her. "Can't sleep?" she asked. He turned. Apparently not. "You either?" "The bond wakes me when you're restless." That made him look at her. "It does?" "Sometimes. It's annoying." "I'm sorry, don't be. It's not your fault." She moved to stand beside him. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything. Nothing." He exhaled sharply. "How to be strong enough to keep my throne without becoming the kind of alpha who executes old friends without feeling anything." "You felt it." "I know you did. How?" "The bond." She touched her chest. "I felt your guilt, your grief, nearly drowned in it." His hands clenched the stone rail. "I didn't know you could feel that." "Neither did I. But tonight it was like ice water in my chest." He turned to face her fully. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to—" "Stop apologizing." She stepped closer. "I'm telling you that you're not as alone as you think." Something in his expression cracked. "Raven, don't—" She backed away before he could finish. "Don't say whatever you're about to say. We have a deal, remember?" "Right, the deal." But they both knew the deal had stopped mattering weeks ago. His eyes burned into mine. My breath caught. "Kaylee, I'm trying not to fall for you," he interrupted, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm trying to keep this practical, but you make it impossible." "Then stop trying." I kissed him before I could think better of it. For a heartbeat he froze. Then he devoured me. His kiss was no careful control, no measured passion. This was hunger unleashed, loneliness burning away in the space between breaths. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kale pressed his face into my neck. "This complicates everything," he said against my skin. "I know. The bond was supposed to be enough, clean, simple. Nothing about us is simple." He laughed, a real laugh, warm and surprised. "No, I suppose it's not." He pulled back enough to meet my eyes. "Stay, tonight, just stay with me." "Yes." He led me to his chambers. The space was sparse. Just a massive bed covered in wolf furs, a fireplace, windows overlooking the chasm. When he joined me, he pulled me against his chest without a word. One arm wrapped around my waist, his face buried in my hair. "Thank you," he murmured. "For what?" "For being brave enough to come find me. For not letting me hide behind practical excuses. For seeing me." I laced my fingers through his. "I'll always see you, Kyle, man and wolf. All of it." Through the connection, I felt his wonder, his disbelief that this was real. And beneath it all, the first tender shoots of something that would grow into love. We fell asleep tangled together, the bond humming contentedly between us. The next morning, back in her chambers, she felt the Luna collar heavier than usual. Raven reached to adjust it and winced. The metal had rubbed her skin raw. "Stop." Kyle's hand caught hers. She hadn't heard him enter. "It's fine. It's bleeding." He tilted her chin up, fingers gentle against her jaw. "The clasp's too tight. I can adjust it myself. Can you?" He was already working the mechanism, so close she could feel his breath against her throat. "This requires precision. You can't see what you're doing." He was right. She hated that he was right. His fingers worked the clasp, loosening it fractionally. Relief was immediate. Better? His voice was low. Yes, but he didn't step back, didn't remove his hand from her throat. They stood frozen, his fingers still resting against the collar, her pulse hammering beneath his touch. About yesterday, she started. I don't think that was wise. Please understand what I am trying to say. Yes. His voice low and trembling, his stormy gray eyes fixed on me. I should... She started. Yes, he agreed. Neither moved. Finally, he cleared his throat and stepped back. If it bothers you again, come find me. Noted. He left. Alone, she pressed fingers to where his had been and admitted the truth. This was getting dangerous. She had fallen in love with the Alpha. Celine Frostborn returned to Skyfang Citadel under the 5th moon turn. She came alone. No guards, no escort, no grand procession announcing the return of Kyle Blackthorn's former bride. Just a single figure stumbling through the northern gates at dawn, wrapped in a stained cloak that had once been fine silk, now reduced to mud-crusted rags that hung off her frame like funeral shrouds. The guards on duty didn't recognize her at first. They saw a beggar, a refugee, some desperate woman fleeing violence in the wildlands. Then she lifted her head, and the morning light caught her face. One of the younger guards sucked in a sharp breath. Moon Goddess preserve us, he whispered. That's Lady Celine. His partner, older, more cynical, spat into the dirt. Was Lady Celine, he corrected. Now she's just another rogue's whore crawling back when the fantasy died. Celine heard them. She always had excellent hearing. Once she would have demanded they show respect, would have reminded them who she was, daughter of House Frostborn, promised bride of the Alpha, future Luna of Skyfang territory. Now she just stood there with her head bowed and her hands trembling, and her pride in ashes at her feet. Her voice cracked. She tried again. I request an audience with Alpha Kyle Blackthorn. The guards exchanged glances. The Alpha doesn't take requests from traitors, the older one said flatly. Please. The word tasted like broken glass in her mouth. Please, I just need to speak with him. I have information about Darius's camp, about his plans. I can help. You've helped enough already. The younger guard looked uncomfortable. Maybe we should at least tell the council she's here. They might want to question her about... Fine. The older guard cut him off with a disgusted gesture. Go report to Commander Garen. But she waits outside the walls. I'm not letting that traitor set foot in the Citadel until someone with actual authority makes the call. Celine nodded quickly, desperately. Yes, of course. I'll wait. I'll wait right here. She sank down against the outer wall, legs giving out beneath her, and wrapped her arms around her knees. And waited. The sun climbed higher. Morning gave way to midday. Celine sat in the shadow of the wall she used to walk freely, watching guards change shifts, watching supply wagons roll past, watching her former life continue without her like she'd never existed at all. No one spoke to her. A few threw curious glances, others spat in her direction. Most ignored her completely. She was a ghost haunting gates she no longer had permission to cross. This is what you deserve, a voice whispered in the back of her mind. This is the price of betrayal. Her stomach cramped with hunger. She hadn't eaten properly in days. Darius's camp had been rationing heavily before she left, and she'd fled with nothing but the clothes on her back and a desperate, half-formed plan. Go back to KL. Beg forgiveness. Offer information about Darius in exchange for mercy. It was a terrible plan, but it was the only one she had. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, a familiar figure appeared in the gateway. Commander Garen. Celine's heart lurched. She scrambled to her feet, swaying slightly with exhaustion and malnutrition. Garen stood with his arms crossed, ice-blue eyes hard as winter stone. He'd never liked her, even before the betrayal. Had seen through her pretty smiles and political maneuvering to the selfish, ambitious creature beneath. Now he looked at her like she was something he'd scraped off his boot. Celine Frostborn, he said flatly. Or should I say former Lady Celine. I hear you want an audience with the Alpha. The Alpha will see you now. The outer council chamber was packed. Word had spread through the Citadel like wildfire. Celine Frostborn has returned, and everyone who could find an excuse to attend had crammed themselves into the hall. Celine walked through those massive doors with her head high and her hands clenched into fists to hide their shaking. The chamber fell silent as she entered. Every eye turned toward her, hundreds of wolves, elders, warriors, servants, families, all staring at the woman who'd once been promised Luna and had thrown it away for a failed rebellion. Celine felt their judgment like physical blows, saw disgust in some faces, curiosity in others. A few looked almost pitying, which was somehow worse. At the far end of the hall, elevated on the Alpha's platform, sat Kyle Blackthorn. Celine's breath caught. He looked different, older maybe, harder. The exhaustion she'd noticed 5 months ago had carved itself deeper into his features, but there was something else too. Something that hadn't been there before. Certainty. Kyle sat on that throne like it had been made for him, like he'd stopped questioning his right to occupy it and had simply become the authority it represented. And beside him, Celine's gaze shifted, and her heart stopped. Beside Kyle, in the seat that should have been hers, sat Raven Ashford, the replacement Luna. The girl Celine had dismissed as weak and insignificant and temporary. But the woman sitting beside Kyle now didn't look weak. She looked composed, calm. Beautiful in a quiet, understated way that made Celine's elaborate beauty feel garish by comparison. Raven wore a simple gown in deep blue, her dark hair pulled back in a practical braid. No jewels, no crown, no ostentatious display of status. But she didn't need it. The way Kyle's body angled slightly toward her, the way the elders included her in their murmured conversations, the way the pack's attention shifted naturally between Alpha and Luna, like they were two halves of one authority. Lady Celine Frostborn requests audience. Kyle's ice-blue eyes are fixed on Celine. She felt pinned beneath that gaze. Judged, found wanting. Speak, Kyle said flatly. Just that, one word. No warmth. No recognition of their shared history or broken promises. Speak. Like she was a stranger. Less than a stranger. A nuisance to be dealt with quickly and efficiently. Celine's carefully prepared speech died in her throat. She'd planned to be humble. Apologetic. To offer information about Darius's camp locations, his remaining forces, his supply routes. But standing here, seeing Raven in her seat, seeing Kyle look at her with nothing but cold indifference, something inside Celine snapped. Pride, desperation, the same reckless ambition that had driven her into Darius's arms in the first place. She lifted her chin. That woman, Celine continued, pointing directly at Raven, is a fraud, an imposter playing at being Luna while the true heir was absent. I demand she be removed and I be reinstated as... Enough? Kyle's voice cracked like a whip. Celine moved to the center. Up close, Raven could see tear-stained cheeks, shaking hands. Alpha King, she continued, voice trembling. I know I have no right to ask for mercy. I abandoned you, shamed you publicly, violated every oath I'd made. Tears spilled. But I'm begging you. Please, take me back. Silence crashed through the hall. Take you back? Kyle's voice was ice. You fled with my brother, destroyed political alliances, made me look weak before the entire realm. And now you want forgiveness? Gasps rippled through the gathered wolves. Angry murmurs spread like wildfire through the gathered wolves. Deception of moon law, execution offense. Both of them. Raven's lungs locked. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't think past the roaring in her ears. Execution. They were talking about execution. Iron Ridge rose slowly. His ancient face was carved from stone, unforgiving. Alpha Kyle Blackthorn, he said coldly, you stand accused of violating sacred law. Punishment for false bonding includes public stripping of rank, exile, or death. Raven's breath locked in her chest. Death. He could die. Because of her. Because he had saved her from his guard's terrible decision. Because he had chosen pack stability over exposing the truth. Because he had been protecting her when he could have thrown her to the wolves. No. This can't be happening. Kyle stepped forward before fear could consume the hall. His presence cut through the chaos like a blade. Commanding. Absolute. I did not complete the true mate claim, he said clearly. The room stilled. Every eye fixed on him. I performed a ceremonial binding only, Kyle continued, voice unwavering. No sacred seal activation, no consummation. No moonmark finalization. The true bond ritual was never completed. Whispers erupted again, but this time uncertain, confused. Legally, Kyle said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, moon law recognizes the difference between ceremonial union and sacred claiming. I cross no final threshold. He turned toward Raven briefly. His eyes met hers, storm gray, steady, full of something that made her chest ache. I preserved her dignity. I did not defile her name. I did not force fate. Raven's throat tightened until she thought she might choke. He was protecting her. Silence stretched across the hall. Then a staff struck stone. Slow, deliberate, and measured. The elder moon seer rose. White hair flowed down her back like snowfall. Her presence alone silenced the hall. Ancient power radiated from her in waves that made Raven's skin prickle and her wolf whine softly with instinctive recognition. She was old. Older than the Citadel. Older than pack memory. A living connection to the moon goddess herself. You argue law, she said calmly, voice carrying despite its softness. But the moon speaks truth. She stepped forward. Every eye tracked her movement. No one dared breathe. The moon does not bind lies, she declared, ancient eyes sweeping the assembled wolves. False bonds fracture. Forced unions rot. What exists between Alpha Kyle and Raven Ashfall has not broken. Shock rippled through the chamber. Raven felt it like a physical blow. Her knees wavered. What? Because it was never false, the seer continued, her voice gaining strength. What you call deception was not deception. It was misdirection by fate. She turned toward Raven. Her ancient eyes, silver like moonlight, endless like the night sky, locked onto Raven's. Raven couldn't look away, couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the roaring in her ears. Raven Ashfall was not dragged into this destiny by chance, the seer said gently, but her words carried through the hall like thunder. She was placed, guided, delivered by the moon goddess herself. Raven's knees nearly buckled. The hall tilted. No, that's impossible. Humans caused the kidnapping. Destiny had used it. The realization crashed over her like ice water. The moon goddess had known, had seen, had guided even the terrible choices of desperate men toward something larger. She wasn't a mistake. She wasn't a placeholder. She wasn't an accident of circumstance. She was exactly where she was meant to be. The thought was too large, too overwhelming, too impossible to hold. Then the seer turned toward Celine. Celine stiffened. Her already pale face went white as bone. Fear flickered across her features, raw and naked and desperate. Lady Frostborn's mother bore twins, the seer said slowly, deliberately, letting each word land with precision. The hall froze. One child was declared dead at birth, removed quietly during political scandal. Raven's heart slammed against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack them. That child survived. The seer's ancient gaze locked onto Raven. Gentle. Knowing. Devastating in its certainty. You share blood, she said softly, but her voice carried through the absolute silence like a bell. But only one of you carries alpha resonance. She turned back to the council, to the assembled witnesses, to history being rewritten in real time. Celine Frostborn was chosen by politics. Raven Ashfall was chosen by fate. Silence crashed down, heavy, absolute. Raven couldn't make her mind accept what her heart was screaming. Celine was her sister. Sister, the girl who had run from this destiny. The girl who had abandoned Kyle at the altar. The girl she had unknowingly replaced and saw her as a monster once shared a womb with her. They shared blood. They shared biological parents. They shared a destiny neither of them had chosen, but only one of them could fulfill. Raven swallowed hard. Tears burned behind her eyes. She looked at Celine across the hall. Celine was staring at her with wide, shocked eyes. Not angry, not hateful, just broken. Like she'd finally understood the cosmic joke fate had played on both of them. Ironridge exhaled slowly, the sound cutting through the silence. This alters the judgment. The elders conferred in hushed voices. Raven couldn't hear them. Couldn't focus past the roaring in her ears. Her entire world had just been rewritten. Everything she thought she knew about herself, her mother, her family, her place in this world. All of it was a lie, or not a lie, just incomplete, a truth she'd never been allowed to know. Finally, Ironridge rose. His ancient face was carved from stone, but something in his eyes had shifted. Reassessment, recalculation. By Moon Court authority, he declared, voice carrying through the hall with formal weight. Alpha Kyle is spared punishment due to emergency leadership action, and also his bride wasn't a fake mate either. Raven Ashfall is cleared of fraud. The ceremonial bond is recognized as the pre-binding phase only. He lifted his staff. The sound echoed through the hall. Final, binding as moon law itself. The Alpha King is granted final choice. Complete the true mate claim with Raven Ashfall. Ironridge's voice rang out. Or dissolve all bonds and release both women. Raven's heart forgot its rhythm. Choice. He could complete the bond with her, make real what had begun as deception. Or he could dissolve everything and release both of them. Release her back to the life she'd been stolen from. Release Celine, start fresh with someone chosen properly. Someone who wasn't her. But Kyle did not hesitate, not even for a heartbeat. He stepped forward, not toward the council, not toward Celine, who had once been promised to him. Toward Raven, his eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that stole her breath. I choose Raven, not shouted, not dramatic, just certain. Raven's vision blurred with tears. Her chest cracked open like an egg, spilling everything she'd been trying to hold inside. I choose her not by obligation, Kyle continued, his voice steady and sure and aimed directly at her like an arrow finding its mark. Not by politics, not by bloodline, but because she is my true mate, my equal, my Luna. Raven's chest shattered completely, every wall she had built to protect herself, every defense she had raised against feeling too much, every lie she had told herself about this being temporary, about the bond being fake, about him never truly seeing her, all crumbled to dust. He chose her, not the bond that had been forced between them, her, Raven Ashfall, the healer's daughter, the kidnapped girl. Celine closed her eyes. Pain flickered across her face, raw and real and devastating. But not anger, not hatred, not the bitter fury Raven might have expected. Just acceptance, grief for what she'd lost, understanding of what she'd never truly had. The seer nodded slowly, ancient eyes gleaming with something that looked like satisfaction. The moon witnesses, she said simply. Those 3 words carried the weight of divine approval, binding as any chain, stronger than any law. Kyle turned to Raven fully. His eyes held hers steady and full of something she finally dared to name. Love. He loved her. Not the idea of her, not the convenient solution she represented. He lifted the collar from the table. The metal gleamed in his hands, heavy, ornate, beautiful. A symbol of power and possession and everything she'd fought against, and everything she'd grown to want. I ask now, freely, Kyle continued, his eyes never leaving hers. Will you stand with me? Not as placeholder, not as obligation, but as my chosen mate? Tears streamed down Raven's face. Yes, she whispered. Her voice cracked. Broke. But it was hers. I choose you. Kyle's hands trembled slightly as he fastened the collar around her throat. This time it did not burn. There was no drugged haze or unconscious submission. Raven felt every second of it, the cool metal settling against her skin, the soft click of the clasp, the weight of it, not a chain anymore but a crown, a promise, a choice. The bond flared between them, not painful, not demanding, but warm and steady and right in a way it had never been before, like something that had been off balance for months had finally clicked into place. The hall erupted, cheers, joy. A few angry mutters from wolves who had wanted to see blood, all of it crashing together in a wave of sound that Raven barely heard. Because all she could see was him, all she could feel was this. Kyle stood and pulled her to her feet. His hands were gentle but sure as they framed her face. My Luna, he said softly, just for her. The acknowledgement, recognition and love is what she lived for. My Alpha, Raven replied, and then he kissed her. Not for show. Not for the watching crowd, just for them. A promise sealed. Later, beneath the moonlight, Raven found Celine in the gardens. She stood beneath the ancient oak tree, her hands resting on her still flat stomach. Raven approached slowly, her feet crunching on the gravel path, each step feeling heavier than it should. Celine turned. Her face was pale in the moonlight. Tired, worn, but calm. At peace in a way Raven hadn't expected. I'm sorry, Celine said quietly, her voice carrying across the small distance between them. For running, for staying silent, for earlier, for everything. Raven swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotions she didn't know how to name. You saved me today, Raven said finally. It was true. Celine could have fought harder, could have demanded her rights as the originally chosen bride, could have made this so much uglier than it was. Instead, she'd stood there and let the moon seer's words reshape reality. Had accepted that fate had chosen differently than politics. Celine's lips curved into a sad smile. "You saved yourself," she replied softly. "I just stopped standing in the way." They stood in silence, two sisters separated by fate, bound by blood they'd never known they shared. Freed by choices they'd both finally made honestly. The moon hung heavy overhead, making the world feel distant, dreamlike. "I'm going home," Celine said finally. "To my father's house. To raise my child. To rebuild something honest." "Will he accept you?" Raven asked carefully. After everything she'd done, abandoning the match with Kyle, running off with Darius, returning pregnant and disgraced, Raven wasn't sure House Frostborn would welcome her back. "He'll have to," Celine said with a faint ghost of her old confidence. "I'm still his daughter, and this child," her hand moved protectively over her stomach, "is still his grandchild. Whatever else I've done that matters." She paused. "You should come home sometimes. Mom will be thrilled to see you. Mom, a family I never knew existed." Raven's voice was barely a whisper. "Soon we will have to make that happen. And Darius?" Celine's face hardened. "Is dead to me," she said flatly. "The Moonseer's revelation bought me mercy from the council. I won't waste it chasing a man who never wanted me as anything more than a weapon against his brother." The bitterness in her voice was earned, raw. "And me, how can I be real?" Raven whispered. The question hung between them. Celine smiled faintly, her eyes soft with something that looked like genuine warmth. "You already know how to be Luna," she said. "You've been doing it since the first life you saved." Her words settled into Raven's chest. True. Permission she hadn't realized she needed. They embraced once. Awkward at first, two strangers trying to navigate a relationship that had been thrust upon them by fate. Then genuine. Two women who had both been hurt by the same impossible situation. Who had both made choices, good and bad, trying to survive. Who had both finally found a path forward. Then they parted, both walking toward different futures. Raven walked back through the gardens alone. Somewhere in the fear and anger and impossible circumstances. She had found the truth. She had found purpose in healing. She had found strength in standing beside an alpha who needed her as much as she needed him. She had found him, and he had found her, and they had chosen each other. Raven wasn't a mistake. She was exactly where she was meant to be. The doors opened. Kyle stood waiting in the shadows of the entrance room, waiting for her. Their eyes met. The charge of emotions came crushing, and Raven couldn't wait another second to be claimed by the man her heart yearned for months. And for the first time since this began, since she'd woken in his bed with a collar around her throat and terror in her heart, she didn't look away, didn't flinch, didn't guard herself against feeling too much. She ran toward him, feeling every inch of his hands on her body. Because he was hers, and she was his, and that was a truth stronger than any lie that had brought them together. Their fingers intertwined, the bond hummed between them, warm and steady and right. "Come on," he said, pulling her gently toward the bed. "We have a future to build." "Together," she said. "Together," he agreed, and as he kissed her, for a heartbeat he froze. Then he devoured her. His kiss was nothing like their wedding ceremony. No careful control, no measured passion. This was hunger unleashed, 5 months of loneliness burning away in the space between breaths. Raven gasped against his mouth, and he swallowed the sound, his hands sliding to her waist, pulling her flush against him. The bond flared hot between them, and whatever came next was a life they would build honestly, a love they had chosen, and a destiny that was finally, truly theirs. This story tells us one thing: fate doesn't always arrive the way we planned. Sometimes it arrives wrapped in chaos, in pain, in the last place we'd ever look. But when it does, it changes everything. Thank you for staying with me tonight. Subscribe, drop a comment, tell me where you're watching from. Until next time.